September 27, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Dawn breaks behind the palms in a wash of orange heat, and the jungle breathes steam. Inside a low, corrugated shack, the diesel generator coughs and settles into a steady growl that you feel through your boots. Sergeant Frank O'Hara wipes a sleeve across his forehead, leaves a streak of dust, and leans into the hooded glow of the scope. The room is dim. The only light is the thin green heartbeat of the cathode ray tube, a horizon line trembling with possibility. The SCR-270 early warning set hums like a living thing. O'Hara adjusts gain, nudges the sweep. A single blip flares at 140 miles, faint. Another blip blooms beside it, then two more. He tilts his head. The pattern, close formation, steady rate, does not look like weather. "Sir," he calls, voice low but urgent. "We got company." Captain Marion Mac Hughes steps in, headset already around his neck, face locked into a practiced calm. He hovers, eyes sweeping the scope as O'Hara marks bearings on a grease pencil chart. The air smells of hot wiring, oil, and jungle rot. Outside, somewhere beyond the coconut trees, engines bark to life on a flight line of patched-together fighters, the Wildcats that lived here like junkyard dogs, stubborn and scarred. Hughes leans over the scope, listening to the minute hesitations in the buzz, watching the blips pull closer in measured increments. "Range 135, O'Hara says. Angels 25. Looks like 30, no, 32, maybe more." Hughes nods, already reaching for the microphone. "Cactus Control, this is early warning. Bogies inbound, bearing 310, Angels 25. 30 plus. Time to intercept, 25 minutes. Out on the strip, the heat peels off the ground in shimmering sheets. Lieutenant Jack Ellison sprints for his F4F4 Wildcat, helmet chinstrap flapping, boots thudding on packed coral. He doesn't need the siren, he's been sleeping in the cockpit half the week, and the mechanic's hand signal is already up. Go. The Wildcat coughs, sputters, then catches, the propeller slicing the heavy air into a hard wind. Ellison glances toward the ridge where, hidden among the palms, the radar shack keeps watch like a lone lighthouse in enemy waters. The voice crackles in his ear. "Fighters, this is Cactus Control. Scramble, scramble. Bogies 310, Angels 25. Climb to Angels 20. Maintain radio discipline." Ellison rolls down the strip, the Wildcat bucking at the ruts, then unweights and leaps into the humid morning, wheels tucking as he banks left over the green explosion of jungle. He tastes salt and dust. The canopy rattles. The Wildcat's nose points toward the high sun. He begins the climb, engine steady at combat power, the gauge needles dancing in the red and white. Below, the strip shrinks into a thin chalk line, the battered revetments like scars stitched across the earth. Far north, above the Solomon Sea, Lieutenant Commander Kenji Sakamoto rides in the glass nose of a G-4M Betty bomber, the navigator's map spread across his knees. His formation moves like a school of glittering fish, tight and precise. Zero escorts skimming like hawks at the edges. He feels the steady rumble of twin Mitsubishi engines through his ribs, the heartbeat of Japanese air power pressing toward the island. They had flown this profile before, high, fast, straight, and had learned the patterns of American reaction, late, ragged, blind. Today will be the same, he thinks. The Americans cannot see through the sky. The radio man taps his shoulder and hands him binoculars. Sakamoto sweeps the horizon, just blue, edged with a smear of cloud, the sun turning the world blinding white. The Bettys keep formation, the Zeros clean and confident. He breathes, slow and sure.
200 kilometers to target, the navigator says.
Back at Henderson, Hughes shifts his weight from foot to foot, listening to reports as if they are the drums of a distant ceremony. Cactus control to Wildcats. Bogies now 120 miles. Switch to interceptor channel. Angels 25. Confirm climb. Ellison's breath fogs the inside of his mask for a second before the ventilator catches up. Blue 3 copies, he says. Angels 15 and climbing.
Blue 2 copies, another voice snaps. Visual on Blue 3's port.
The air thins, becomes smoother. Ellison feels the Wildcat settling into rhythm, engine throbbing, wings flexing, the aircraft a living animal taught to climb. He wipes his thumb across a photograph taped beside the instrument cluster, a grinning crew chief holding a wrench. The radio crackles again. Fighters, Vector 310. Intersect bearing for bogies in 10 minutes. This is early warning. 30 plus maintain altitude. No change in speed. There is a pause, then a different voice. Hard, clipped from the radar shack. Be advised. Escorts present. Repeat, escorts present.
Sir? The navigator asks.
Sakamoto's finger presses against the glass. They are climbing before we arrive. He calls to the escort leader on the radio, voice steady but sharpened by surprise. Increase screen. Maintain altitude. Prepare for intercept. On Henderson Field, Hughes exchanges a look with O'Hara that would mean nothing to anyone not living with the set's whisper. The blips swell. The pattern thickens. The Americans are in position. For the first time on this island, they will meet the Japanese raid from above instead of beneath it. Hughes feels the weight of the moment in his throat, a gravity he hides under habit. Cactus control to all fighters. You are cleared to engage. Repeat, cleared to engage. Ellison steadies the Wildcat on its climb, eyes narrowing. The world shrinks to the canopy frame and the blue dome beyond. The first black specks grow into shapes, into wings and fuselages and glittering canopies. The Zeros roll to meet them, smooth as dancers. He tightens his grip on the stick. The Wildcat's engine roars. Somewhere behind the sky's sheen, a boxy shack hums and thinks, and because of it, you are already where you need to be, waiting. The first Zero dives, sunlight flashing off its wings like a blade. Lieutenant Jack Ellison jerks the Wildcat into a climbing turn, the G-forces pressing him into the seat, blood draining from his vision. His gun sight trembles as the Zero streaks past, tracers stitching the air. He squeezes the trigger. 50 caliber rounds spit fire, the vibration rattling his teeth. The Japanese fighter rolls away, smoke trailing from its wing root. Above, the Betty bombers hold formation, their bellies heavy with ordnance meant for Henderson Field. Lieutenant Commander Kenji Sakamoto feels the sudden lurch of defensive fire as his gunners open up, twin streams of tracers arcing into the sky. He peers through the nose glass, expecting the Americans to be scattered, late, uncoordinated. Instead, they are already here, dozens of Wildcats climbing in disciplined arcs, cutting into his formation like knives. Ellison banks hard, pulling into the bomber stream. The Betty looms ahead, green fuselage glinting, red Hinomaru roundels stark against the wings. He steadies, breath shallow, and fires. The rounds hammer into the bomber's nose, glass shattering, smoke belching from the engine. The Betty staggers, drops altitude, and peels away, its escorts scrambling to cover. Blue 3, splash 1 Betty, Ellison calls, voice tight with adrenaline. On the ground, Hughes listens to the radio chatter, each call sign a heartbeat.
The radar scope still pulses, blips converging, but now the pattern is breaking. Japanese formation unraveling under the sudden, unexpected interception. He exchanges a glance with O'Hara, who scratches another mark on the chart. They never saw it coming, Hughes mutters. At a 1.0 pace, Sakamoto grips the radio, barking orders. Maintain formation. Escorts, drive them off. His voice is sharp, but inside he feels the tremor of disbelief. The Americans had been waiting. They had climbed into position before his bombers even reached visual range. It was impossible, unless they had eyes beyond the horizon. Ellison dives again, tracers flashing past his canopy as a Zero latches onto his tail. He yanks the stick, the Wildcat groaning under the strain, wings shuddering. The Zero stays glued, its pilot relentless. Then, from above, another Wildcat drops in, guns blazing, forcing the Zero to break off. Ellison exhales, sweat dripping into his mask. The sky becomes chaos. Wildcats and Zeros twisting in lethal spirals, bombers breaking formation, smoke trails crisscrossing to blue. Yet beneath the chaos lies order. The Americans had intercepted at altitude, had struck first, had forced the Japanese into defense. Radar had given them the gift of foresight, and the Japanese officers could feel the balance shifting in real time. At a 1.0x, Sakamoto watches another Betty spiral down, flames licking its fuselage. His navigator stares wide-eyed, voice trembling. "Sir, they knew we were coming." At a 1.0x pace, Sakamoto's jaw tightens. He doesn't answer. He knows the truth. Somewhere on that island, hidden in the jungle, the Americans had a machine that could see through the sky. The Betty formation is unraveling. Smoke trails mark the sky like scars, and the once perfect diamond of bombers now looks jagged, broken. Lieutenant Commander Kenji Sakamoto grips the edge of his seat, knuckles white, as another American Wildcat slices through the formation. His gunners fire desperately, but the enemy fighters are already in position, waiting, coordinated, relentless. He cannot understand it. Every raid before had caught the Americans scrambling, their fighters clawing into the sky too late, too low. But today, the Wildcats had been waiting at altitude, perfectly aligned to strike. It was as if the Americans had seen them long before they arrived. "Sir, they knew," the navigator whispers, voice trembling. "They knew before we came." At a 1.0x pace, Sakamoto's mind races. He thinks of the reports, rumors whispered among officers about strange American machines, devices that could sense aircraft beyond sight. He had dismissed them as propaganda, exaggerations meant to frighten. But now, watching his bombers fall in flames, he feels the weight of truth pressing down. Below, Henderson Field shakes as bombs finally drop, scattered, inaccurate, hurried. The Japanese attack has lost cohesion. Craters bloom across the coral strip, but most miss their targets. The American fighters had forced the bombers to release early, breaking their precision. On the ground, Captain Hughes listens to the radio chatter, each call sign a thread in the tapestry of battle. He knows what the Japanese officers are realizing at this very moment. Radar has changed the game. The SCR-270 set, humming in its shack, had given the Americans eyes beyond the horizon. At a 1.0 pace, Ellison banks hard, lining up another bomber. His guns roar, tracers slashing into the fuselage. The Betty erupts in fire, fragments scattering into the sea below. He exhales, chest tight, adrenaline burning through his veins. He knows the difference today, the reason they were ready. Radar. At a 1.0 pace, Sakamoto stares at the chaos, disbelief etched across his face. His formation is bleeding, his escorts overwhelmed. He grips the radio, voice low, almost to himself. They can see us before we arrive. The words hang heavy in the cockpit, carried on the static of the radio. For the Japanese officers, it is a revelation as shocking as any weapon. The Americans had unlocked a power invisible yet undeniable, a technology that turned the sky itself into a battlefield of foresight. The raid is broken. Smoke drifts across the sky, fragments of aluminum glittering as they tumble into the sea. The Japanese formation, once tight and disciplined, scatters in ragged arcs. Bombers limp home, engines coughing, escorts weaving desperately to shield them from the relentless Wildcats. On Henderson Field, the ground crews watch with wide eyes. They had braced for devastation, for another pounding that would crater the strip and torch the revetments. Instead, they see American fighters returning in formation, wings scarred but intact, engines still strong. The air smells of cordite and salt, the jungle trembling with the echoes of battle. At a 1.0 pace, Captain Hughes steps out of the radar shack, sweat streaking his face, headset dangling around his neck. He looks toward the sky, where contrails fade into the horizon. He knows what just happened. Radar had given them the edge. For the first time, they had met the Japanese raid on their own terms, prepared, positioned, ready. Ellison taxis back onto the strip, canopy open, face pale but grinning. He raises a hand to the crew chief, who runs alongside the Wildcat, shouting over the engine's roar. "We were waiting for them," Ellison says, voice hoarse. "They never saw it coming." Far away, aboard the surviving Betty bombers, Lieutenant Commander Kenji Sakamoto sits in silence. His men are exhausted, shaken, their voices hushed. He stares at the horizon, the island shrinking behind them, and feels the weight of realization pressing into his chest. The Americans had a weapon invisible yet unstoppable, a machine that could see through the sky, that could strip away surprise, that could turn every raid into a gamble. Back at Rabaul, Japanese officers gather around maps, listening to reports of the failed mission. The words repeat like a drumbeat. They were waiting. They climbed before we arrived. They knew. The officers exchange uneasy glances. Some whisper of strange American technology. Others dismiss it as coincidence. But Sakamoto knows. He had seen it with his own eyes. Radar had changed the war. The jungle hums with insects, the strip buzzes with engines, and in a small shack of corrugated tin, the SCR-270 set continues to sweep the horizon, its green line pulsing like a heartbeat. Silent, unseen, it watches the sky. And somewhere across the Pacific, Japanese officers sit in disbelief, realizing that the Americans had unlocked a power that would haunt them for the rest of the war.